How's everyone doing? Who's ready for Christmas? All two of you. Great. Awesome. I don't know. It's just kind of that season. You know, things are getting kind of real, right? You know, Christmas is getting real. Most of you, some of you are done with finals. Congratulations to you. And now it's just kind of like Christmas mode. I get it. You know, things are getting real when the weather's getting cold, especially in Southern California when weather just doesn't get cold. You know, like you put on your ski jacket when it's sub 60. You know what I'm saying? You know, things are getting real when you hear like, dude, Mariah Carey Christmas songs every single day when you're not even trying to listen. You know, I expected a little bit more laughter on that joke, but that's okay. You know, things are getting real when in a secular kind of not so Christian culture like ours, you see the nativity scene over and over, you know. And the funny thing is, you drive around neighborhoods and see decorations, you see the nativity scene, you know, which is exclusively a Christian thing, a biblical thing, and then you see Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and then Santa Claus, and I'm like, I just don't see it in the text. I mean, someone tell me, am I missing something? You know what I'm saying? It's funny. And so you know things are getting real when the nativity scene starts hitting you heavy. I grew up on the nativity scene, and most of you probably have too. When I say I grew up with it, it wasn't just a church thing. I was in multiple performances of the nativity scene. I was once a shepherd. I was once Joseph. I don't know why they picked me to be Joseph. I'm pretty sure Joseph wasn't husky and good looking like me, but I'm sure he was a little bit slimmer, you know, and so, you know, they put me in a beard, even though Asian men don't grow beards unless you're Pastor Josh, and you know, and I'm standing there with my thing. You know, I was a magi once. I was a wise man once. But one time, and this kind of makes more sense, aesthetically speaking, I was Santa Claus in the 3rd grade. It was I don't know what's so funny. I was Santa Claus in the 3rd grade. It was my debut to stardom. That's why I'm a celebrity pastor today. And so I was Santa Claus. They put me in a Santa Claus costume. They put me in a white beard, Asian guy in a white beard, go figure. And now you know, all the 3rd, 4th, 5th graders are singing, and it's like a school presentation. And they're singing Christmas songs. They're singing Jewish songs. They're singing Kwanzaa songs. They're singing none of the above songs. It's the most theologically confusing thing ever. And then out from the back comes little old me, Santa Claus, right? Ho, 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 Merry Christmas with a fake bag of toys, and everybody is laughing. And I joined Mary and Joseph and Jesus in the nativity scene with my bag of toys, right? And we're like, oh, this is the most politically correct Christmas that could ever exist. And so the nativity scene is something we're incredibly familiar with. I don't think I need to preach at you what happened. You know Mary, you know Joseph, you know baby Jesus, you know the Magi. You're maybe guessing there's 3 of them because there's 3 gifts, but who knows how many there were? You know the scene. My question to you is, do you know what it means? I'm not asking you to tell me the story. I'm not asking you to tell a 6-year-old kid what happened. Even though that is important, I'm asking you, what does it mean? Who is it that is laying in the manger? Why do wise men from the east travel miles and miles and miles to check out a baby? You see, what we see here in the nativity scene, in this thing that we grew up with, is this image that invokes peace, and it invokes serenity, and it invokes silent night, holy night, and we sit and we pause and in wonder, and it's a beautiful, peaceful scene. But let me tell you something, church. This is a king. This is not just a cute little niece or nephew of yours that was born. This is a king, God who has come into the world. Did he come to bring peace? Yes, but he came to bring so many other things. The Bible clearly proclaims that we have a king who is worthy of our worship. we have a king who is worthy of our worship. And so the question is not if you worship. The question is, what do you worship? Who or what is the object of your worship? What do you celebrate? What do you treasure? What gives you meaning and significance? What gives you a sense of delight and joy? And so here's what I want you to think about today as we continue in the Advent season. This season, and even this week, will you let the King disrupt the normality of your life? As you look at the text and as you think and wonder, what does it mean? Will it allow you to speak to where you are now in your life, this week, this season? Will you let him, the King, come and instill in you a hope and a joy that only a true King can do? That is what I want you to think about today. Go with me again to verse 1. Follow me in the text. Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." Now stop there, church. What do we know about these wise men? Just by looking at the text, there's not much that we can pull out. They're called magi. Okay, interesting fact. Does magi sound like any word that you know? Magi, magic, magic, magician. Magi comes from the word magic, or rather the other way around. Magic comes from the word magi. They're known to be sorcerers, spiritual people. I'm not making that up, by the way. That is true. Sorcerers, spiritual people, kind of ancient David Blaines, right? Creeps me out, but it's true. These ancient David Blaines, these sorcerer type of guys. Now, what does that have to do with anything? Now, do you remember the story of Daniel, Old Testament story? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Daniel in the Lion's Den. You remember that story? Now, just to kind of sum up for you, there's a guy, King Nebuchadnezzar, kind of a crazy guy. He has these crazy dreams, and he's bothered. And so what does a powerful king do when he's bothered by a dream? He doesn't journal it. He doesn't post it on Facebook like a normal guy. He calls upon the sorcerers, right? The magi, the spiritual people. Must be nice, right? You get a little boo-boo, little nightmare, and you call upon all these people, right? Can you imagine I get a nightmare and all of a sudden Matt Redman, John Piper, Tim Keller, start coming on me. Oh, you had a little dream? Tell me about it, right? Must be nice, right? And so King Magi or King Nebuchadnezzar is telling these magi about these bad dreams, and they can't interpret it. The most spiritual people, these sorcerers, these David Blaines, cannot interpret King Nebuchadnezzar's dreams, but there's a guy who can. Call up Daniel. Daniel comes into the scene. The king tells Daniel about his dream. Daniel interprets it on the spot. King Nebuchadnezzar looks at these wise men and he says, "What am I paying you for? Get him out of my sight. I don't need him. What's the reason for the existence? Go kill him." Daniel pleads for their lives and saves their lives. Now these wise men now look to Daniel, and Daniel tells them of a coming king. One day, God will send a Messiah who will be our hope. He will be the one to be our Savior, a king. And now these magi look to Daniel and they say, this guy is legit. And so what do? They wait 600 years, 6 centuries, as that legacy, as that prophet, as that prophetic word is passed on generations down from sorcerer to magi, 600 years. And now here they are waiting for a king, and the king has finally come. How do we know that what they came to do is so significant? How do we know that their worship is legit? Because something that these magi did is that they didn't just sit around and tell stories and interpret dreams. What they did was they were known to be spiritual people, and they would crown Persian kings. Kings didn't just come and crown themselves. They had to be spiritually sanctioned. And so these magi would crown these Persian kings. And so these magi have come miles and miles and miles, waiting around for 600 years to finally crown a king. Why is that significant? when a magi, a wise man, come miles and miles to crown a baby boy. If little Dylan, if you know little Dylan, youngest member of EM, if he comes to me and he says, Pastor Howard, good sermon today, right? Thank you, Dylan. That's an honor. I'm so blessed. Thank you. No problem. I'd be blessed. I'm a cute little kid, telling me I did a great job. If John Piper called me and it said, I'm convicted by your Advent sermon series, I'm writing a book. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's something else. Little Dylan tells me, oh, that's cute. Thank you. Okay, Tim Keller calls me. Okay, I'm getting my PhD. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, that's something else. Magi have come to crown King Jesus. It's not common men. It's not farmers. Magi have come to worship and offer gifts and King Jesus. That should tell us something about what these people understand about Jesus. Now, the narrative continues. Now, notice what happens next in the narrative. Verse 3. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And assembling all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. Now, same question to you, church. What do we know about Herod? Herod was the guy who expanded the second temple. If you remember the story about Jesus coming into the temple, going berserk, using a flog to flip over tables, flipping over money, money tables and money changers, and these people were selling, in the temple. Jesus comes in and said, this is a house of prayer. How dare you? That was the same temple that Herod was expanding. I don't know if you knew this about King Herod, but he actually had a family of his own. He had a wife and he had a kid. One day he decides, I'm going to neglect my family. I don't care about them anymore. I'm going to marry another woman, a woman of power, because this woman is going to now bring to me a little bit more of a status bump up. She's going to up my power. And so he completely neglects his own family, marries someone else. Why? Because he's a little bit obsessive about his power. History will tell us that King Herod was so obsessive about his power that he would murder his own family because he feels threatened. And it turns out that he actually even murders his second wife. The very woman that was supposed to bring him power, he feels threatened by. So what does he do? Get rid of her. What we find in a few verses later is that he becomes furious when he realizes that he was tricked by the Magi. And like any normal person who gets angry and pissed off, what do? We Snapchat it and we Facebook it. He doesn't do that. What does he do? Oh, go and kill off all the male Bethlehem kids. I don't need them. They're a threat to me. Go and murder them. These young Bethlehem boys who don't even know who King Herod is are now murdered because a man is threatened of his power. If you want to analyze Herod at a heart level, you want to reach down through the pages of history and do a little bit of counseling and see maybe his upbringing led to him where he is now, you can go ahead and do that. But what we know about King Herod is that he was obsessive about his power. When Scripture says that he was troubled, it means he was threatened. And so he's in his kingdom one day, probably scheming about how to add more power to his kingdom, how he can increase his control. And then one day, these wise men come in and tell him about another king. And so what does it mean that King Herod is troubled? It means he's threatened. And I know this sounds a little bit weird to you, but I kind of get it. I'm not a king by any means, but I kind of get his troubledness, because when someone else who comes into the room and all of a sudden poses a threat to you, there is a knee-jerk response. And I've shared with you before that control is something that I struggle with. And I'm learning to let go, and I'm learning to be okay when things don't go my way. Am I going to go out and murder a bunch of Bethlehem kids? No. But I will have my knee-jerk reactions. Now, you might connect with me on this too, believe it or not. If you're the prettiest girl at church and another girl who you know is prettier than you walks into the room, maybe you're a little bit threatened. You're the most athletic guy. Everybody knows that. You're the fastest, you're the strongest, you have the prettiest shot, and then a guy walks into the room who is clearly faster, stronger, taller, bigger than you. You're the most spiritual, you're the smartest, you're the most intellectual, you're the richest, and someone just one-upped you. And now you start to feel a little bit threatened. And there are knee-jerk reactions to that. Here's what I want to point out about what we see so far in the scripture. You see the reaction of the wise men, and it's worship. You see the reaction of King Herod, and even the Jewish leaders, they're threatened. Whatever their reaction was, it was because they realized something about Jesus. He was the king. That truth does not change. Your reaction does. Your response to the truth that you see will change, but the truth that King Jesus is king does not change. What did they realize about Jesus, this baby boy in a manger? God has become man. Immortal has embraced mortality. Light has stepped down into darkness. And that all just means that the king has come. So let me tell you how that speaks to us. Does Christmas tell you about a coming king? When you sort through the nativity scene, and you sort through all the Christmas plays that you've been through, and you sort through all the Christmas decorations and all the Mariah Carey songs, and you start to ask yourself, what does Christmas mean? Does it tell you a story about a coming king? Does the incarnation captivate your heart? Does it stir in you a wonder and an awe of who Jesus is? Does it disrupt the normality of your life? Does it change your habits? Does it cause your heart to have a disruption? Does it cause you to worship, or does it threaten you? Whatever it is, one thing that Christmas cannot do for you is nothing. You see, as obsessive as Herod was, at least he was honest. At least he was true in his response. At least he saw the truth of Jesus, and he responded in a way that he knew how. Church, how are you responding to the Advent season? A movement, maybe in your intellect. A movement in your affections, in your emotions, in your heart. Is there a stirring in you? Because when you realize that Christmas is about a coming king, it will cause you to respond. And let me tell you something, church. Not responding is a response. Passivity is a response. I'll tell you, this past week for me was tough, to say the least. Maybe I'm being a little bit dramatic, okay, but honestly, it was a little bit miserable. I'm going through finals, and I'm looking at everything that I have to do, and I'm trying to perform at a high level, trying to do well in my classes, trying to take care of my ministry responsibilities, relationships, and everything's just getting crazy. I'm looking at everything that I have to do, and panic starts to set in. I wake up in the morning, and it's scheduled, 9 a.m. to 10 a.m., panic mode. 10 a.m. to 11 a.m., you need grace. Like, it's scheduled in my calendar. And I'm trying to handle these things. I have a final in 3 hours. I'm not lying to you. I'm going to say hi to everyone, right? And then I'm going to drive to Lake Forest, and I'm going to regurgitate 1,000 years of church history onto an exam in 3 hours, literally. And so now I'm in panic mode, and now I'm trying to get things done. And it's to the extent that I've put this pressure on myself where I've somewhat now neglected my family. I think I've said like 3 words to my parents in the past 2 weeks. I try to visit my nieces every week. I didn't do that this week. I try to lift 2 to 3 times a week. I didn't lift at all. Like my eyes are just getting burned into the computer screen because I'm just staring at it, trying to soak in this content. And the pressure is just building. And let me tell you, it's getting like, I have 2 cold sores. Like, I don't know if you noticed, I can't talk right now because there's a cold sore under my tongue. Okay, sorry, TMI. But I'm getting stressed and I'm getting tired. And then come Wednesday, I'm looking at Matthew 2. I'm looking at the message. I'm looking at my application. I'm looking at the truth that I'm proclaiming to Livestream Christian Reformed Church. And I just think, idiot. Practice what you preach, man. Are exams, and as weird as it sounds, is ministry so important, such a high priority, that you are going to let Christmas pass before you and you don't even know it? Are you going to let the coming King, as you wait and as you preach every Sunday about this, are you going to let it pass? Or will it let it disrupt you in the busyness and in the stress and in the high pressure? You see, the real fight is not deciding what gifts you're going to get for your family and friends. The real fight is not trying to get through the nativity scene. It's not trying to fulfill all your responsibilities at church, because some of you, I know, have a lot on your plate. The fight this Advent season is seeing the truth of Jesus and then allowing you that to be a source of response. The real fight is stopping and waiting and receiving. Right? Stressmas, we all know about that. Can you stop? Can you pause? Can you see that King Jesus is here? And can you let that start to speak something to your heart? And so as we wait for Jesus this Advent season, how are we going to respond? How will you respond? These wise men show us very clearly how they respond. They worship. And when I say, well, we respond this Advent season through worship, I know, me too. I know that a lot of us don't need a lecture on worship because we've worshiped all our lives. Raised in the church, infant baptized, gone through Sunday school, hundreds and hundreds of sermons and Bible studies that you've learned and heard. You don't have to tell me what worship is, Pastor Howard. I get it. I know what worship is. Now, let me tell you, okay? Let me tell you what worship is not. Verses 3, let me read this again. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. Now hear this. And assembling all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. Now, King Herod hears about a coming king, and he's threatened, and he's having a freak-out moment, and he calls on the chief priests and scribes. Okay? Kind of get into the details of the scripture. Okay? A powerful king, obsessed about his control and power, and he hears about another king, and he calls on these people who are supposed to know what's up. Hey, did you know about this coming king? Why am I the last person to know about this? Chief priests and scribes, the spiritual leaders of Judaism, aren't you supposed to keep me in the loop about this? Right? And now you would think, trying to look up the scriptures, right? Look up Daniel, look up the Old Testament. Did we miss something? No. They didn't miss anything, church. Notice what the wise men do. Yeah, they inquire. Do a little bit of research. Get their facts straight. Because that's what they're supposed to do. But listen to me. Notice they don't ask questions about why this king has come. They don't ask questions about how he's coming. They don't ask questions about what it means, because they know. All they really ask is, well, where is he going to be born? They knew about this coming king, and they were completely unmoved. No response, no affection, no stirring, no disruption. Because they didn't care. The most knowledgeable people, the most theologically trained, the most churched people, the most synagogued people knew everything there was to know about the prophet, through the prophets, about a coming Jesus, and they were unmoved. You see, choosing to not respond is a response. Knowledge alone is not worship. Going to church your whole life is not worship. And don't think that because you've heard the Christmas story 1,000 times and that because you're raised in the church that you don't have to give any attention this Christmas season to the fact that King Jesus is here. And don't think that because you were fed Christmas stories ever since that you were in the womb that you know everything there's to know. They knew everything about a coming Messiah, but their hearts were cold and they were unmoved. You see, church, that is equivalent for us of going through Advent worship songs with no conviction. That is equivalent for us listening to all the Advent sermons and then leaving the service with nothing. No movement, no stirring, and no response. I get it. You don't have to tell me. Let me be on my way. And so then, if that's not what worship is, what is worship? The Magi go and they search for the baby, they follow the star, they find Mary and Jesus. And now look at verse 11. And going into the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and they fell down and worshiped him. Then opening their treasures, they offered him gifts, gold, and frankincense, and myrrh. Now, if you don't know what those are, in the most simplest way I can put it, these are luxurious gifts. I don't get it. Why would you bring gold to a baby? I don't know, but that's what they do. I've told you stories about my twin nieces. If you're new here or visiting, I have twin nieces, and they're almost 2 years old now, and Christmas is coming up, and it just so happens that their birthday is also coming up. And as the coolest uncle on the planet, I don't know what to get them. Because the rule of thumb, right, will get them whatever you want to get them. I can't do that. Hey, 60-inch flat screen, what's up? You don't want it? Okay, I'll take it. It's like, I don't know what to get them, And so when I'm thinking through the eyes of a baby, what does a baby appreciate, right? You get them a box of gold and they're going to play with the box. That's what babies do. Why in the world would Magi bring gold and frankincense and myrrh, these ceremonial gifts, gold, which nothing can beat? You see, why do we worship Jesus? As covenant members and as believers, we worship Jesus because the gospel is we look at our sin, we look at our darkness, we look at our depravity, we look at how we sin today and this season, and then we are driven to the cross. We see grace upon grace upon grace. We see the sacrifice of Jesus, and then there's conviction. And then the more we sit on the fact that Jesus saved us in his grace and mercy, the deeper our worship becomes. Do you hear me, church? That's what worship is. These Magi, they didn't know about the cross. There was no Ephesians 2:8-9 for by grace we have been saved. They didn't know that there was going to be horrific crucifixion of Jesus Christ. They saw a baby, a king, lying in a manger. So what do we get him? I don't know. Gold, frankincense, and myrrh, because it's the best that we can give him. They worshiped without even knowing about the cross. We know about the cross. We know that light has stepped into darkness. We know that life has stepped into death. We know that a king became a commoner. We know that God became man. Isn't that what Christmas is? Isn't that what the nativity scene is? That's what it means. All for what? So that a king would die for his people. So how do we worship? What do we learn about worship here? They worshiped in a way that know how. We are to also worship in a way that we know how. Through sacrifice, through faith, in a way that says, this is about you. This is about you coming to save us. Emmanuel, God with us. King Jesus is here. Don't just know about what happened at Christmas. Know what it means. Know how it should spur you on towards a worshipful response. Does Christmas stir in you a response? And church, how will you wait for the King to come this season? Will you let it pass, or will you wait in anticipation? If you're joining us today for the first time, we're going through 4 weeks of Advent, and these 4 weeks all the way leading up to Christmas, we're lighting one candle. And the reason we light candles is because the Christian tradition is that As we light each candle, we gaze upon the light, and what that tells us is that we wait for Jesus, who is light of the world, to come to us. Jesus is light in the world, as John 1 says, who has stepped into darkness. And so what we're going to do now is just spend a time in reflection. I'm going to light our second candle, and we're going to spend some time in reflection. So join me in reflection.